Hello, this is the voice of Stuart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of vital conversations that I have with global soul stewards from all over the world who provide us with an understanding of how we can create a new hierarchy of values that is absolutely significant at this unique time of becoming. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. And here I am with my dear friend, EMMANUEL DAGHER. Are you picking this up? You okay?
Yes. I was trying to share it on my community. I couldn't do it. I'll do it later.
Okay. Well, we can send you a recording immediately afterwards. And so, as well as in, oh, Robin, you're here. Fantastic. As well as sharing with dear Emmanuel, welcome and willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Welcome to all of those people who are tuning in either live through this early streaming or indeed later. Sarah, all the way from Eugene, you see, we have people from Oregon. Robin, I can't remember where you are, but you're Midwest, aren't you? Anyway, lots of lovely people. And there's Michael, looking good, brothers. Well, hey, Michael, I don't know Michael, so perhaps Emmanuel knows Michael. So
Yes.
we have lots of people automatically arriving to this unique meeting. We're both Taurians, you see. And apologize to everybody. Stuart just made a subtle mistake about time sequences, which is why we've needed to shift this. Unfortunately, my dear brother Emmanuel was able to, Illinois, thank you, Robin, was able to shift his time sequences because as we all know, he's a very, very busy person. So it's always wonderful to feel your vibration on this platform with me. I feel as though I come home every time I see you in the screen. And although we've never actually shared space physically, because we've always met via Zoom through this process of COVID, it's always wonderful to feel you because it feels as though your star system is meeting my star system. Co-creation is the vital essence of what we share. And at the same time, in so doing, recognizing that we're stars literally wrapped in skin, it's almost as though we become one star system. So, Emmanuel, from the bottom of my heart and the very depth of my soul, thank you for sharing space.
Thank you, brother. And I would say that everyone tuning in, whether they're with us live or they are with us later on in the recording, we feel the same with all of you. We feel the oneness, the connection. We see you as the stars that you are. So thank you. And you too, brother. I see you as the star that you are. Thank you for creating this safe space for all of us to step into.
Oh, bless you, bless you. So you did what I was about to do, which was firstly see you at the center of the solar system, and then bring in all the other stars. There's Julie and Jennifer and Cheryl and Monica and Lisa and Vivica and another Cheryl. Oh, same Cheryl, Patricia, and etc., etc. So welcome everybody to this unique conversation. So let's get down to it. Our substance today is the quality of bliss that both Emmanuel and I are trying to illuminate for ourselves and indeed for our entire community. I know that bliss is at the very core of your being, and particularly as you spent much of your early life in a situation of unbliss. And yet, I'm just really referring to the social devastation that you were party to. But I know that you were also feeling yourself to be protected by elements of bliss, particularly in the form of those two powerful ladies in your life, your grandmother and your mother, and also the angels. It must have been an extraordinary release or relief when you were able to feel that your field was no longer contaminated or disturbed by much of the early elements that you picked up in
Mhm.
Beirut. Is that so?
Yes, and I truly believe that the core essence of who we all are, we can say bliss, we can say peace, we can say love. It's all really, there's some nuances there, but it's all really the same thing. And I think all of us, especially those who are empaths and sensitives, we came to this world to really be in our power. And the world as we came into it didn't really teach us how to do that. And so I sense that as the sensitives, the empaths that we are naturally these sensitive, loving, pure, whole, divine, blissful beings. And we are simply unraveling, coming back to that space of awareness of who we are. And I think a lot of the things that I've learned personally is I don't believe in positive, negative, good, bad. Like I think that can exist. It's an illusion and it's an experience that we can have, and it can be very real to some people who choose that. But I also feel like there's something much greater happening around that, which transcends all of that. But to preface, that was prefacing that I think as empaths, we tend to always give our energy. We're always outputting energy. I know many empaths are not even usually operating at 100% because they're always outputting energy. And so, one thing that I've learned throughout the past decades and through a lot of the struggles that I've seen others have, the struggles that I've had, is it's so important every day to just make sure that we are making all of our energy that we are outputting, we are making sure that we are also giving that to ourselves. We are filling our energetic cup, our vessel, because if we are not showing up for ourselves in that way, it can still, we can still be of service, we can still help, but it's not making the impact that it would if we were doing that same exact thing for ourselves. And so to really enter a state of bliss is to commit to showing up for ourselves. Sometimes that's going to feel foreign to us. It's going to be like a different language, or it's going to feel unfamiliar because it's not something that was taught to us. There was no manual going on early in our lives that showed us how to do that. But we are finding our way, and now is the time, collectively and individually, for us to step up for ourselves more than ever, so that blissful state of innocence, of joy, of love, of excitement, of connection can fully realize itself. So that's sort of a long version of what you were asking.
And you speak of many things, and I was making mental notes, but I started to get sort of lost within my own mental note taking. But I do have a question for you. I feel that my understanding of what you're presenting is the fact that we are from the source, and that the source is an infinitely unfolding creative possibility full of love and joy. And so, therefore, we are from we we can't call it a space because it's non-spatial. Let's call it a kingdom, because then it takes on a metaphoric quality, which is actually its constituent parts are all bliss not even bliss driven, but bliss lived. So there is this continuous flow of bliss, of ecstasy, of expansion, of joy, of well-being, etc., etc., etc. And then we come here to experience the only planet of choice, where we are suspended within duality. And of course, you and I, we have this fundamental belief that what we're really looking at is an illusion. And yet there is day and night, and there is man and woman, and there is love and hate, and there is ease, and there is dis-ease. And so we're beginning to see ways of being able to muscularize ourselves back into the choice of joy and the choice of bliss, so that we can feel these qualities and all the other beautiful lights really leading what our lives are all about. So the question that I'd love to put to you is, what do you feel we stumble against in life that moves us away from our inchoate state. Because as we all know, that we're born with this spiritual toolkit, which then often is not endorsed or encouraged. What do you
Mhm.
feel happens?
Mm. Oh, that's such a deep question, and I would say that there are many there are so many angles we can approach this, but what's to come through right now is that because we are so entangled in each other's projections and belief systems and structures and ideologies, there's so much of that going on. What happens is we sometimes believe them as if they were our own. And when that happens, like for example, let's use the example of being in a romantic relationship and in a partnership. How many fairy tales are there out there that just literally tell us that, you know, you meet a person, there's this euphoric experience in the beginning, and then you live happily ever after. And so, if we are conditioned that from early on as children, now things are changing. We are seeing a little bit more progress in outside of the box fairy tales. But I know when I grew up, fairy tales were still very much indoctrined in the nothing will phase you. Everything happens great once you find the woman or the man of your dreams. And so what happens is that with that then starts to come expectation of how things should be, how they should look like. You start to put pressure on that person or the the even yourself for not attracting a person or attracting a person. So there's a lot of these unnecessary, although I believe everything is necessary because it brings you back to your awakening, your awakened self. But there's a longer path that then happens that makes us get caught up in the day to day expectations and the confusion and the need and the feeling of the lack and the feeling of the worry and is this going to happen and all of those things. But ultimately what all of those things, especially in neuroscience, they teach us is that they are agitations, and agitations can be good because they are actually shaking things up so we can step into showing up for ourselves. But most people, when there's agitation, they either shut down, they kind of go into hiding mode, or they go into fight or flight mode. And there's no right or wrong, but there is a third option, which is to step into. So the way we step into is to make a commitment, first step, to feel the discomfort, to sit with it, to be with it as if it's our child or some part of us that we love. But so many of us have viewed discomfort and pain and suffering as something I don't want. It's not a part of me. But if we do that, the mind will resist us and it will fight us and it will say, oh yeah, it is a part of me. So our job as awakened beings and mindful beings is to embrace the mind and welcome it and give it a seat at the table and say, okay, you have the right to have your emotions, your experiences. I'm going to love you and I'm going to love those emotions. And you do that by simply feeling them and you sit with them. We are, especially in Western societies, we are so taught to keep going on a hamster wheel. We're always go, go, go mode. And so what happens is we are not really taught to take breaks and pause. It's a little more prevalent in European culture to take breaks than, let's say, American culture. But even European culture is always go, go, go. So we want to bring in and covet the breaks, covet the pause, the experience of space for ourselves, so that when it does come time for us to take action, we are operating at our 100%, not getting entangled with expectations and all of those distractions that we push against, but we actually allow it to be part of us. We love that part of ourselves. So it just gently takes a back seat, and then you start making decisions from that piece. which is just underneath that bliss that is your true essence, just underneath all of the stress, all of the trauma, all of the struggle is peace. And our job is simply to return to it. And the way we do it is simply to feel the discomfort and give it its due diligence, its due time until we come back to that peace.
Wow, that was a wonderful flow, and you bring up so many interesting things. So at core, it feels as though what you've just shared with us rests in the fact that we are conditioned, socialized, educated into doing, which is the achievement of the left brain supremacy. The difficulty with our doing is that we learn how to do the tasks, but most of the time we're not doing what we could be doing because they say so. Not because we falter, but because they say so, and as a consequence of that we falter, and then we begin to literally filter out the glory of what we come in with, which is this state of bliss. It's interesting, isn't it, that one of the greatest intelligences of the 20th century was once asked by a group of students. This man keeps popping up, so you'll hear his name in a moment. He was approached by a group of students who said, "Master, what books do you think we should read?" And he said, "Oh, read fairy tales." And they thought that he'd misheard. So they asked again with their expectation of, no, you need to read Max Planck or Eric Bohm or whoever was around. Eric Bohm wasn't around at that time, but I'm talking about Albert Einstein. So they asked him yet again, "But master, what books?" And he said, "Read fairy tales." Now, what's interesting is that he was coming out of a level of consciousness that accepts the metaphor within fairy tales as being an immensely balanced state of being and not cast just within the fantasy. So that we learn moral order, or we are reminded of moral order. We are reminded of that, do you want to trust Snow White or do you want to trust the wolf? It's that wonderful line that Margaret Atwood brought forth. Not the wolf is in the wood, but the wood is in the wolf. And that's really interesting. So we get caught up in the metaphor of into the woods. However, the difficulty is that the fantasy that has been brought about as a result of not being able to accomplish the set dreams that we've been led to by the doing has led us into an impasse. And it seems that now much of those fantasies are being exposed within significant people in our world. For example, 2 years ago, we watched a fairy tale wedding between Prince Harry, that is an extrapolation of the name Henry, and his American actress, divorcee, biracial lady. And we took part in that fairy tale because we love that whole idea of Jack marries Jill and all shall be well, except on this occasion, the fairy tale is being exposed for the illusion that it was. Because although they were living the incandescence of their love, it wasn't being fully appreciated by people on the outside, particularly the spectre of darkness known as the press. And unfortunately, as we've seen, a situation, or maybe fortunately, a situation has repeated itself that took place with Harry's mother. So it seems that although the fairy tales provide us with extraordinary information about the way that we can possibly manage our lives, both within the height and in the depth, but now we're beginning to realize where the fantasies lie. Do you feel that the recommendation of bliss is a reality or a fantasy?
The recommendation itself is almost almost blocks you from connecting with it. It's more about embracing and returning back to your true self, which is bliss. So I do believe bliss itself is true. it's a true reflection of who we are. And a lot of people mistake the idea that you can't be sad and you can't be blissful at the same time. You can't be mad and you can't be blissful at the same time. You know, there's this idea that we live in a world of or, this or that. And as you were mentioning, Megan said something in her interview that she said, well, they can like Kate, but they can also like me too. Something like that. And there was this, I felt an energetic, like, what? Because in fairy tales, there's always a villain and there's always a heroine or a hero. So, this idea of duality is wonderful to learn about and study so that you can see what resonates with you and what doesn't. Do you want to project and make it them versus me? Do you want to live in that world? You're allowed. You are. And so, one thing that I sense that's happening right now in the world is there's an empowerment, and specifically an empowerment for women and men and children of all ages to really step up for themselves. At the end of the day, what do we want? We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be loved. We want to be appreciated. We want to be taken care of. But who has been doing that? We've been wanting it to be society, fairy tales, the media, people, a lover, a partner, our parents. But who can do that only for each of us is ourself. So you have the opportunity to show up and see yourself. You have the opportunity to honor and love yourself. You have the opportunity to be gentle with yourself and not be so hard and in judgment, especially because that's a form of protecting ourselves. So that's what I think a lot of the undertones of what's happening, and even with many of the racial things that are coming up, and a lot of the gender things coming up, they're all coming to the surface to be honored, addressed, and alchemized back to their original state, which is perfection. Because really, what is the illusion of separation? It's I see you as separate than me, maybe because I don't understand how it is to be in your body because your skin is a little darker than mine or whatever. I'm going to judge you. Well, that's all it is. It's an ignorance. They don't understand what they don't know. And so this is all helping us understand what we may have not known so that we can alchemize it and know better. And when we know better, which is ultimately saying that we are choosing to remember what life is all about, which is we are all family, we are all extensions of one another, and really coming back to that compassion and that love and that understanding. And if you see that interview, I'm not really into um, current events in the sense of what's hot and what's not. But this just happened to be very intriguing, the whole interview and all of that, and how it's being responded by the monarchy. But it's very intriguing because it is playing. It's really the macro of what's going on micro in everybody. So do you feel like you are showing up for yourself? Do you feel like you're fitting in? Do you feel like you have to work harder than most to get what it is that you want? I mean, all these little subtle nuances that she had to go through in order to get the prize ultimately, it really was not worth it, because now it's about her freeing herself into being able to speak what she wants to say, express what she wants to say, being in a communion with a partner that sees her, recognize her for the goddess divinity that she is, and vice versa, to be able to come and go as she pleases. These are, and there was another thing that really struck me in the interview. She said, I couldn't have chickens. I couldn't be I mean, just little things, everyday things that most people take for granted, she wasn't able to fully receive. And to the loyalists, and I say loyalists to the fairy tale, that's all I'm talking about. It's like, well, how can you complain because you have millions of dollars now or even more and you have the world at your disposal and all that, but none of that matters if you are not able to be yourself and to experience this connection with spirit and with the earth and all of that. Megan's mom goes to the same spiritual center that I used to go to, which is Agape International. And it's all about spiritual principles and connection. I even think maybe Megan had some influence around that. So she came in very awake, very conscious. And then she was literally in such a pressure oriented scenario that she had to. Dim her light to such a degree when you've been, especially as a Leo, right? Just being so light filled, and then all of a sudden having to almost give up your existence, your identity. It really creates a conundrum because to go from such an awakened state back into the box, we heard what she said she was going to do. And so I think all of that to say that you cannot box a conscious awakened being. It just can't happen. And we can, we can see and hear what the media might be saying in Europe. We might hear what it's saying here, all of that. But ultimately, that's because they're trying to hold on to the fairy tale. And they're trying to create this story that we all must live up to. But the only fairy tale, the real fairy tale that exists, is the relationship between you and yourself. Are you showing up for yourself? Are you loving yourself? Are you listening? Are you doing what gives you life? Or are you doing what you think the world is expecting of you? And I think that is freeing the empath. And that really is freeing us from the illusion and returning us back to the bliss. That was a mouthful. I'm sorry about that.
It's a lot. You're talking about a lot of things. As we were using Harry and Meghan as a sort of centrifugal force for what we were talking about, I believe that they walked into the situation in reality. I don't believe for one moment that they were actually believing in the negative aspect of the fact that this was a fairy tale. But what soon began to happen is that they began to feel how the negativities that were being set up, in contrast to their bliss, brought about a quality of internal endurance that was really transfiguring. And so it led them to an escape route. In so doing, it's not the fairy tale that is at fault. It is the patriarchal system that will not embrace the empathic, the compassionate, and the free thinking, feeling individual. It tries to take hold of all of those energies and corrupt them into an automaton-like status. And what they both did was to say, this is not for us. I believe, therefore, there are many parallels in our own lives. What's interesting, of course, is that in their emergence out of it, as you brought up the notion of, for example, well, they have a lot of money, so what's the problem? That what happens is that there's a tremendous amount of negative shadow aspect triggered within all of us that if we're not careful, we then project onto them in some form of accusation or blame, rather than to see that they're social ciphers within a social document. They're both individuals. They're trying to become the master mistresses of their own destiny. But actually, they're also these ciphers by which the whole of our lives at this moment can be read. And if you go deep into the quest that they were on, it's very mythological. I mean, her whole movement into the royal family, although it appeared was blissful, it was rather like Persephone going into Hades. And the story of Persephone going into Hades, into the darkness, is that her mother, Demeter, the goddess of all, is searching for her everywhere, and then hears that her daughter's been captured by Hades and taken into the underworld. So Demeter herself goes into the underworld, and I feel it was the love of all of the people that encouraged them to look, to encourage Megan, who was the Persephone figure, to actually really consider how she could extricate herself. And maybe even the spirit of Diana was there helping a form of extrication to take place. So we're seeing the purity of the damsel come back into the overworld. And what we need to do is celebrate that rather than project all of our own negativities onto it, simply because, this whole statement about, but they have a lot of money. And of course, the other thing about the fact that they earned a lot of money from the show with Oprah. Well, I mean, Oprah says at the very beginning, let's just establish that we're in neutral territory in a friend's house and that nobody is receiving any form of financial dividend from this conversation. Your only reason for having this conversation is to elicit absolute truth. So it puts pay to the fact that they were being paid. That's just part of our own shadow because we feel that they somehow have more than we have. So really all we're doing is measuring our own associations with loss and scarcity. What's going to come out of this is that all of our prayers in the blissfulness are going to be sent to these sacred two, and we're going to see them do extraordinary things, but in the land of the free, i.e. in the United States of America. There's a tremendous amount of change that needs to take place within the patriarchy of Europe. Unfortunately, it's weighed down by heritage and tradition. These are very beautiful on occasion, but at the same time, they're very, very heavy energies. And, there's a certain degree of lightness and levity. I find about you wonderful Americans is that whenever you can find an opportunity to celebrate, the inner child comes out to play. You have many more high days and holidays than any country in Europe. An opportunity to have a break. I mean, I always feel that, for example, Thanksgiving appears, and we all know that revving up to Thanksgiving at the end of November, that there's a sort of stillness taking place in the 2 weeks prior. And then, of course, everybody's so high because of Thanksgiving that then is it really worth going back to the office? I'm talking times beyond COVID, before Christmas. No, let's just continue. And then nothing really wakes up until the second or third week of January because, again, everybody's celebrating these wonderful opportunities of recovery. It's interesting that you guys tend to have recreation at the forefront of your consciousness. And, I love the word recreation because it really means recreation, how do I recreate myself? The dwelling place of bliss is a place of perfect happiness, where our souls can be at peace. What do you personally do to achieve your own bliss? And I'm thinking very much, I know that we all know that you rearrange the interior of your being, but I just wondered about your own personal bliss where you live, because although I've never seen your house, where you're sitting looks blissful.
Yes, yes. So some things that help remind me of the bliss that's within. I love classical music. Bach is my favorite, one of my favorites, and Vivaldi as well. And just really listening with your inner ear, not just kind of like having it in the background, but sitting with it and being with it has been euphoric for me. Nature, always. Nature is like hands down number one. Give me some trees, give me some, mountains, and I'm good for a long time. Walking, exercising, and just being in those moments in between the destination and the trying to, get there. Really being in those moments of listening to the birds, doing mantras. I do mantras all the time. I love your mantras too. They're just amazing. And Music, I think just music is just so deep
Mm,
for me, as you know, being a Taurus. And what are some other ways? Being of service. One of the things I'm so grateful that I get to do what I love, which is simply to serve. And the key that I've been having to learn as an empath all these years is just like many who are the matriarch or the patriarch of the family, who is always giving and outputting energy, they can understand this, is to create healthy boundaries. And as empaths, boundaries are just a foreign concept. They're extremely hard to, they were extremely hard for me, um, to master, and I'm still practicing it every day. But it's just that need to want people to feel better that kind of gets in the way sometimes.
mm,
But it's that same need that really gives me life because I'm always happy to serve and be of service. So finding the balance there gives me bliss. And it's an endless, it's always evolving and growing. So, but that's really where I've been at right now,
mm,
is creating those boundaries in a
mm,
healthy way.
mm. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And I mean, you speak of so many different things, which is glorious, as a route towards bliss. And I wonder, I mean, as always, I concur in harmony with so much that you speak of. But I wonder if the lack of definition in personal boundaries is actually more to do with the narcissism of empathy, which is that I need to feel comfortable in myself. And so, therefore, I'm not going to create boundaries because, after all, then I'm going to have to be responsible for the nature of what's going on within. But what I'm going to try and do is either leak energy from other people, or to try and stimulate as much compassion, as much love on the outside, so that everything is always going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going, rather than just, as you were saying at the very beginning of our dialogue, of being able to accept where the darkness sits and being okay with it. The more we do this, I feel that we're given a pathway to bliss. It's rather like that wonderful story from Native America, which, there you are in the wild, and if you're bitten by the snake, the cure is 20 feet away. The cure is always 20 feet away. The difficulty is that we're so caught up in the hysteria of being bitten by the snake that we don't realize, we become non-present, and so we don't realize that the cure is somewhere away. What do you feel is it about Bach or Vivaldi or any of their brothers? Because we're talking about the 18th century. What is it? What is it about those composers that really touches you?
Um, I think for me, it's the melodic. They're very melodic, and the time. Like I like more things that are a little bit relaxed, a little more space. I think really those were the meditation music before meditation music. And maybe there was music before that even. But I love strings. Strings just activate something within me. Um, very much so in the crown chakra, the third eye, the throat. So more of the upper regions, I notice. And I just think it's very. I have a as an earth sign. I have a mathematical side as
Mm,
well. Very earthy, very pragmatic side. And I think a lot of the melodies activate that part of me as much as
mm,
they do the spiritual
mm,
side. I find that I write better, I study better, I learn better when I listen to some of those arpeggios and,
mm,
allegros and things like that,
mm,
that really help to kind of almost like, rather than being, so the mind likes comfort and safety, and it almost literally takes you out of it, almost opening up new neural pathways. That's how I feel. I don't know if it's scientifically
mm,
proven, but I feel like that's what it's doing for me. And it helps me get out of the uh, doing mind and into the being mind, which is the wisdom, the
mm,
awareness, the consciousness. And that's really, I mean, there's so many things that it does, but on a surface level, that's sort of how I would put it together.
mm. Remarkable. Yeah. Um, there's a wonderful book that was written several years ago now, 25, 30 years ago, called The Mozart Effect, which was written by one of the world's leading violinists at that time. And because we know that the strings um, were used almost frantically by Mozart in his creations. And there's that wonderful story about how he presented a new regime of music, his music, to Emperor Joseph, who was the king of Austria at that time. And they listened to, I think, the Third Symphony, and the king said, too many notes. And Mozart said, yes, and everyone is important. He was one of the first indigos that came to disestablish the whole substance of what the patriarchy is all about. But there is, in the science of music, not that I'm a scientist in the slightest, but, working within medievalism, I learned that there is an immense correlation between geometry and sound. And that in fact, coming forward just into the 18th, latter part of the 18th century, Goethe said that all architecture was frozen music. That there is within is interesting, isn't it? Because I worked and almost lived in a sacred geometric building for 15 years of my life, and this was the reconstruction of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, which is based on sacred geometry made solidly out of wood and oak wood. Sitting on 7 converging ley lines directly opposite the Earth star chakra of the world. So huge magic took place within the embodiment of what that creation was all about. However, that there are within the science of music, within register, within the harmonic patterns, within the harmonic sequences, there is actually an extraordinary geometry that is opened. And we've discovered that the geometry that can be opened is actually completely in correlation with what you were referring to within the synapses of the brain and within the spinal column. So, I'm going to have a conversation this week with a gentleman who has found a way, he's a wonderful American gentleman, who's found a way of curing bipolarism purely and simply by listening to certain forms of music.
Wow.
So we're going back into sound as a healing modality. And when we listen to certain periods of sound, or rather, we're talking about music arising out of certain periods of history, we know that there is harmony or there isn't harmony. And Masaru Emoto really showed us that, didn't he, within his Miracles of Water, because you can actually see an ice crystal which has been formulated whilst listening to Bach there on a G string, and there is this perfect geometry about it. I'll put some photographs up on Facebook later so that people can see them. And then there are also representations of music that we may refer to as being heavy metal. And what's interesting is that crystal formation is in chaos rather than in harmony. So yes, what we need to do is to find these specific measures, what we were referring to as being energy boundaries, to help us really construct the harmonies that we want in our lives, so that if we go into the world and we experience the toxicity of disharmony, when we come back into our own personal world, our homes, our inner temple or sanctuary, the energies there foster us moving back into harmony. And therefore we become more emotionally intelligent about the relationships that we foster. We haven't really spoken about your great dream for the creation of your own wonderful empire during the course of this year. What do you have that you're creating that embraces all of this richness?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for all that you are creating. You are just such a light, not in just this world, but in the universe, so beyond the universe. So thank you for standing in your power, speaking your truth, and being an example for all of us to do the same. So thank you, brother. I'm so grateful for you. Please receive that. Yes. And good.
In fact, you don't know how timely what you've just said is as a point of reassurance that this is what is perceived because of what I've been going through over the last 2 days, which was a reemergence of that time of my life that I've just referred to, which unfortunately, although 10 years of it literally was lived in complete harmony within this sacred building, then the latter stages, a demonic energy came in to move the entire structure and the behaviors of all of those significant people within, including the audiences, into something really disharmonic. That was 12 years ago, and it's still happening. So the building is beginning to crumble. So I was actually in a meeting yesterday trying to help a group of very extraordinary people to understand what the potential is there. So, one gets taxed by the fact that the world says you don't know what you're talking about. So thank you for the reminder.
Of course, yeah. It's just you already knew that on some level, but thank you for allowing me to be a confirmation for you. And keep going, brother. Like we need you. So just know that. So what I've been doing is just the thing that I'm very passionate about is taking very challenging concepts, especially metaphysical and spiritual concepts, and making them so easy, so palpable to
Oh, please
understand.
do. Please do. That's amazing. I love it. I
So
love it.
yes, so that's what I feel like one of the things that I'm here for is just to bridge, we can say spirit to matter, because a lot of times people see matter as separate, but it's actually an extension of. It is the manifestation of spirit. So I have created a YouTube channel recently in January. I started, so there's a lot of things, a lot of contents, how to do this, how to awaken, how to overcome depression, how to be happy. So things like that. I also have posted a lot of healing sessions where I use the core work, which is the healing modality that I developed to help go into the subconscious, letting go of all those blocks and limitations that kind of hold us back. So there's series of healing sessions there, and then there's also mantras. So we do affirmations and mantras. So those are right now what is transpiring on the YouTube library. I like to call it healing library. And then of course I have, I like to write. I have an energy forecast every month that I post on my website, just kind of talking about what's going on energetically that month and how best we can navigate in a way that is empowering to us, not in a way that feels disempowering. And books, and I mean, there's so many things, but ultimately, my highest intention or dream or goal is to simplify what everybody's complicating, whatever it is. And I feel like spirituality is in everything. It's in even speaking about, I'm not a royal expert, but what we spoke about had nothing really needed to know about expertise with the royal family, but it has to do with awareness of spiritual principles. And I
Mm,
think
mm,
knowing spiritual principles, you can really bring that into, and of course, psychology, bringing all of that into the mainstream in a way where we can have dialogue, but it doesn't have to be someone is wrong, someone is right. It just is, and it's perfect.
mm.
And hopefully, what I provide is a different outside of the box way of thinking.
Yes. Well, the discursive, argumentative aspect of debate, rather than the harmonious, empathic union of conversation, is really a thing of the past.
Mhm.
And I thank you for saying all that you've just said, because I feel that what we're doing, what this particular moment that we're sharing called deep dialogues, that the entire impetus behind this arose out of the great stillness that many of us were feeling during April, May, and June of last year, where I was being contacted by people that I hadn't seen for a very long time or hadn't been in conversation with. And as a result of that, because I truly value those relationships, because of their empathic conversational element, that I was being introduced to other people of worth, of note. And the quality of conversations were just so deep, so substantive, so interestingly curious about the nature of causation, because obviously at that time, as we're still doing, we're asking fundamental questions about what does this mean? What is this? Because we've never experienced this level of global closure as a result of a world pandemic and the ensuing economic uncertainty and the unsettling nature of the geopolitical quaking that's taking place, which is bringing about this. And of course, we know this is all being stimulated by the enormous geometry of the movement of the spheres. So to hear that you're creating simplicity out of conundrum, I think is absolutely amazing, because really what we're fundamentally talking about is that right at the very core of it is love. And so people that haven't felt love often come to me, I'm sure they come to you as well, and they say, but I don't know what love is. How do I know if it's love? And my immediate resource is, but you feel it. It's not a question of quantification. It's a question of qualitative. You feel it. So you're reminded of the simplicity of what it is to just simply be held in a warm embrace, energetically speaking, by that person as you look deep into their eyes and realize, there's a fellow human being sitting over there. Whereas actually, much of my life has been quite traumatized and has made me feel alien. Now I actually see that this is why I came here. I came here to establish this interconnectivity. Um, tell us more about the mantra that you were speaking about, because it gave me a spark of inspiration when you said that. Because I've been thinking about the same thing of recording many more mantra, which is why I started re-recording the angelic Om chant and also moving into the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. And there are many others that I'm going to be making. What mantra were you particularly tuning into?
I always use myself as a reference point. So when I was 17, 18, I started working with mantras, and one of the mantras, the first ones that I worked with, was the Lakshmi mantra. And so the goddess of love, peace, beauty, healing. And so that was like my start off point. And then when I was healing myself of much of the physical dis-eases and pain and discomfort that I was having with psoriasis and scoliosis and everything in between, I was using a very powerful mantra. Do you want me to say it, or is it
Yes,
like,
come on.
okay, it's kind of hard. It's not it's not
Lots of
easy.
wonderful people on the chat box are saying, "Can you share them, please? What's
Yes.
happening here?"
Yes.
David was talking about, by the way, David Howlett was talking about how wonderful to know about the substance of fairy tales, the metaphor, how the metaphor shaped by mother and every son, or father and every daughter, have been going on for thousands and thousands of years. But indeed, there is divinity within fairy tales. So I just take this pause before the wonderful Emmanuel goes into sharing mantra with us. Ask questions, guys, because the chat box is infinitely more open than it was. Sorry, I just put a piece of paper over the microphone. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes.
Ask questions. So please share the mantra with us.
Yes. So obviously we spoke about Lakshmi. So the one I use, there's several, but it's the Om Shrim Mahalakshmiye Namaha. So that's the one I do. And then the other
Can you
one,
please explain who Lakshmi is for anybody who may not know?
yes. So goddess Lakshmi is this, I believe she's a Hindu goddess, and it's all about if you're struggling financially, if there's some lack going on, if there's some blocks there, she really opens you up to prosperity. And we're not talking about just money, because money is just an extension of what prosperity is. We're talking about the kind of prosperity where you show up for yourself so that you can give yourself joy, you can give yourself love, you can give yourself that compassion, so that you can then open yourself up to how that's going to look like in the world. When you feel like you are worthy and deserving, the world is going to match that. And so that's the way I see it. I mean, it can be unique for everyone, but that's how I see it. The next one is I found it somewhere on the internet. It was many years ago. It just said very powerful physical healing, and I researched it in the past few years, and apparently it's representative of the Rama. So Rama is also very powerful God, and so and I'm not. I'll preface this. I'm not into personalities or anything. I feel like for me, it's more about the tone and more about the intention. And because I feel like millions of people have been working with these mantras prior, especially the ancient ones, I am tapping into all of my sisters and brothers that came before me, their support. So I feel like a choir of millions of people chanting it with me who came before me, and that makes it more powerful for me. So that's a little extra step that if you want to visualize, especially with very well-known mantras. So this is how it goes. So it's Om Apa Damape Hartaram Dataram Sarva Sampadam Lokabiramam Shriramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham. So I'm going to do it as a chant real quick just so that you can feel it. Om Apadamape Hartaram Dataram Sarva Sampadam Lokabiramam Shriramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham. Om, and then you do that about 108 times, and that will help you really feel lighter. You feel more euphoric, and it actually has a power to physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally bring you back into alignment.
Emmanuel, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hidden depths, hidden depths. We haven't shared this aspect of our personalities, so our sacred personalities. So I feel that this is absolutely extraordinary, because every month, every full moon, I offer something, and now hundreds of people are coming, called enchantment, where we chant magic into our lives, we chant love into our lives, we chant abundance into our lives. And of course, I delve into the great chants. So hearing you mention these, stimulating all of the extraordinary experiences that I've had in the East, with being called to Satya Sai Baba 45, 50 years ago.
Wow.
And I still, I don't know if I've ever shown, I still wear his ring, which he gave me, which is the olive in diamonds and in gold, which he just took out of the air. He was standing in front of me doing this, and I thought, what on earth is he doing?
Wow.
Wear this. I will always be with you. So
wow.
I've had a number of Indian teachers, so I'm very used to sitting for hours and hours and hours, cross-legged on the floor, chanting bhajans. I'm so glad you're doing this, because these sacred syllables are really coming back into our consciousness in a really big way. And I feel it's to do with the next stage of opening our DNA. This weekend, I'm going to be doing a retreat in Egypt online, and because of the equinox, and it finalizes by doing a special ritual around the Sphinx, which is an extraordinary being. You must come. I'd love to share Egypt with you, Emmanuel, and all you wonderful people sitting out there as well. I'd love to share Egypt with you, because about 25 years ago, I spent the whole night between the forepaws of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx spoke to me and gave me prophecy about this time, that I would be using certain sound sequences and mantra to, not just me, obviously. I'm not going to be grandiose to suggest that it's only me, but a number of us will be called, and we will literally chant around the body of the Sphinx, and sonic doorways will open within the Sphinx to reveal to us extraordinary information about Atlantis and Lemuria. So part of our, I'll send you the time when we're doing it, so that you know we're at the Sphinx, and please be my guest if you want to come and join us. I'll send you the details, so that the mantra can act as keys to open up incandescent possibilities within our own beings, as within some of the so-called form that we see before us, like the sandstone body of the Sphinx.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've gone over time. We're going to have to, unfortunately, bring our conversation to a close. Any information? Thank you for sharing mantras, Emmanuel, from dear Robin. I would love to know where you both get your inspiration from for mantras and breathing techniques. This is darling Jackie. Over to my brother.
Um, just through experience and research. I'm an avid researcher. I think a good teacher has to be an excellent student. I've never had any gurus. I've never had any, I honor all of that, but it's not really usually what is resonant for me specifically. So I just sort of do my own thing. I'll research, I'll study, I'll go to the library and just learn. And the more we learn from our heart and feed our spirit, I think that's the greatest intellect, when a lot of mantras do provide that. So that's sort of the way I do it. How about you, brother?
Oh, I just simply allow life to speak to me. It's again through the curiosity. We both being who we are. Where is your moon? I can't remember.
Um, Sagittarius.
In
Yeah.
Sag, that's right. Because my rising sign is Sag. My moon is in Gemini. I feel that's because, you know, you've got the fire of Sag, I've got the air of Gemini. We're very inflatable as a result. So what we do is we use our natural born curiosity, that question why, we use that to stimulate, and therefore the resources come. But to be more practical for these wonderful people listening in, and particularly Jackie, who asked this question, may I ask, could you share with us, post this dialogue, 3 of your mantra recordings, whether it be you or a resource that you may have found that have stimulated your spiritual body? And I'll do the same thing. And we put them jointly, co-creatively on each other's Facebook. How about that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Why 108 times? Melinda asks, why do we need to? It's the 108 times on the mala bead, but why 108 times? Any awareness of that?
I've read this before. It's not coming to me presently, but I believe there is something special about that number. Again, I'm not into conformity and structure as much as, let's say, some people are. But for me, I just go with what feels good. And 108 is a good landing point if you don't really know how many you want to do. Sometimes you can do 50, sometimes you can do 1,000. Just see what feels best for you. But I know if you Google it, there is some dialogue and some more expansion around that number 108 that is out of my present thinking pattern.
It's associated with Vedic astrology and therefore Ayurvedic principles, Kriya Yoga, Ayurvedic medicine, and so forth and so forth. And it's in the Western mind, as we're Western beings, in ancient numerology, it's the number of completion before we begin a new cycle. So by completing the 108 rotations of the mantra, we reach a point of celestial completion where we are lifted into perfection for the next stage of creation. 1 and 8 is 9, 9 is the number of completion. There's a wonderful recording of, which I must send you if you haven't heard it already, 108 Names of the Divine Mother by Craig Pruess, which I've used for the last 25, 30 years in the corporate world. And it's quite extraordinary what it does to people. So I'll share that with you. Anyway, thank you so much, David. Do either of you have any opinion on Jung's concept of synchronicity? A lot of similarities in both your philosophies with this concept, which we, well, you know, Emmanuel and I have known each other in so many past lives that what we're really doing is discovering each other. But do you have anything you'd like to say about synchronicity?
First and foremost, I actually have never heard of Jung's concept of synchronicity, but I have heard synchronicity in in passing what it's about. So it sounds like that's what they're asking. And synchronicity is just another way of saying in alignment. And I think our soul and our essence, which is the universe, I don't think that we are separate, is always giving us opportunities to align. And it can do this through many things. It can do this through our senses, our inner senses. There are so many things. There's people who talk about number sequences. There could be serendipity, things that are kind of like, you're like, whoa, how did that? I was just thinking that. How did that show up? So I feel like it's all already there. And I think the synchronicity is just a manifestation of piercing through the veil and connecting more with your true essence. That's really how I see it. That's more of the practical way that I see it.
Oh, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I often think that synchronicity is the universe winking at our souls. And so something distorts in the space-time continuum and magic happens. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been in the presence of a remarkable spirit teacher who's very widely recognized in the mind-body-spirit community around the world, particularly in the United States where he lives. And for the last 10 years has become a best-selling author, a great spiritual teacher, and a founder of the healing technology, the core work method. As you've seen, Emmanuel has some very remarkable gifts. And so please, he has touched tens of thousands of people. Would you please link in with his website, which is EMMANUELDAGHER.com. And thank you so much for listening in. You're all really, really beautiful, and you've been wonderful in all of your lovely comments. So thank you, Felicity. Thank you, Stephanie, Lisa, Nola, so many of you. You've been absolutely wonderful. And I look forward to seeing you next week when another dear friend is coming on, one of the United States leading theater directors, a female theater director, to talk about the soul of the artist. So bless you. Thank you so much. Please stay where you are, dear Manuel, while we close down. Thank you, Ryan, for all your help.